Hello, my name's Shay Coker. I'm managing director at Savills based in Miami, Florida. Today, my guest is Kevin Mofid. He's the head of logistics and industrial research from the mothership, our head office in London. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you for inviting me to do this.
So Kevin, there were a lot of doomsday scenarios regarding Brexit. Could you paint a picture of the UK logistics market pre-crisis?
Yeah, by all means, it's interesting. I've been talking, writing, and speaking about warehouses for about 12, 13 years now. I've always been on the research side of things, and frankly, when I first started my career 12, 13 years ago, nobody wanted to speak to me. Logistics and industrial property was the ugly duckling, and people were more interested in shopping centres and office buildings and so on. Online retail changed everything, and that led to a surge in demand for warehouse space. Now, what does this have to do with Brexit? That was your question. Well, what Brexit did was it amplified some of the issues that existed in our market, and it made those issues front page news in many respects. Issues like the lack of supply of warehouse space. So in certain parts of the UK, London, for example, we have a vacancy rate of about 3% for warehouses. That is historically low. The average amount of warehouse space transacted per year has more than doubled in about 10 years. So you had this issue where rents were rising, the availability of warehouse space was falling. People were talking about their supply chains. How did they get product into the UK? How were just in time operations going to work? If you were an automotive manufacturer, or if you were a aerospace manufacturer, or if you were a pharmaceutical manufacturer. So Brexit, what Brexit did was make those issues, part of the national debate about Brexit. Everybody was talking about stockpiling, warehouse stockpiling, which actually, by the way, wasn't really a thing. But we got a lot of airtime in the press about it, so we shouldn't necessarily complain. So Brexit amplified the issues, and now the issues around the virus, in many respects, have amplified those issues even further.
Right, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to stockpile too much, because that's leads to some increased cost of inventory, obviously.
Exactly. It was never in anyone's interests to stockpile product. It wasn't in the operators' interests. It wasn't in the retailers' interests, and actually, it wasn't in the landlords' interests either. Because actually, in the UK, the average lease length for a new warehouse is 18 years.
18 years.
Exactly. That was the average lease length last year on a build-to-suit property.
Okay.
And so if you're a landlord, where the average lease length is 18 years, and you have somebody who wants to stockpile something for 6 months, what are you going to do? It doesn't make any sense from a landlord and developer perspective.
Right. What about, not talking about built to suit, but what about regular leases? Are they long in terms as well, typically, or?
Yeah, typically speaking. So again, the average lease length for a second-hand building last year was just shy of 10 years, and a building constructed speculatively was just over 13 years. So in the UK, we are, depending which way you look at it, if you're a landlord or a tenant of space, The landlords are obviously very happy that the leases are long. It's good for their investments and so on. But if you're a tenant, if you're an occupier of space, maybe it makes your operation less flexible than it could be.
Right. So I saw you recently came out with a report that shows that the first quarter, the take up was extraordinary. It was very high. So what's the bottom line on that right before the crisis?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we've just spent some time collating lots of information on the market, and actually Q1 of 2020 was the third highest quarter we've ever recorded of demand for warehouse space. The third highest Q1. Sorry, I should clarify. What's driving that? Again, it's the online retail piece. There was a big deal to Amazon, which made up arguably skewed the numbers. But actually, that being said, there were the transaction levels, if you strip out the square footages, were actually broadly in line with their long-term averages. But it's that online retail piece again. So if it isn't the online retailers doing something to grow their business, it's what I would call legacy retailers doing something to compete with the online retailers. So it's you have this double whammy really of demand from the online retailers, and then you have the legacy retailers going, actually we need to compete here. We need to get our supply chains fit for purpose. And again, the current crisis in some ways is pushing people to use online retail in a way that they haven't before. And again, there is a school of thought that the current crisis will accelerate that process even further.
Yeah, for sure. So I would imagine that your term online retail is basically the American term for e-commerce.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously you have the Amazons of this world that are doing well in the new environment, despite the lockdowns. What is it? Are those the only kind of industrial or logistics clients that are doing well?
No, it's really interesting actually. So you've got Amazon, who have stayed open, and they are delivering what people need. You have the food retailers who already had a very good presence online. So the food retailers are very active. Interestingly, some of the homewares companies are doing quite well as well. So companies who provide tools and raw materials, for you to paint your house and do things in the garden. A lot of people have decided that this is the time that they're going to do that job that they've been putting off. And actually, I tried to buy something for my garden the other day, and a major homewares retailer in the UK, I tried to go on their website, and it said I was positioned, I think it was 55,000 in the queue. And I needed to wait online for 4 hours to get a slot to buy what I needed for my garden. It's a bit like getting concert tickets in high demand when you keep on pressing refresh. That's the new world.
Wow, summer's right around the corner.
Yeah.
So do you have any strategies or any tips for tenants, logistics, industrial tenants that are struggling or that maybe trying to figure out what to do?
Well, what we've seen in the UK is the government have been reasonably proactive in terms of measures that they're putting in place to support companies and businesses. So so the government have put in lots of information here, but also actually the landlord community, I feel, are being very proactive as well, and they're looking after their tenants. There is a social good to doing that. They're looking at things like facilitating rent holidays or moving to monthly rent payments and things that the property industry can do to support the tenants. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is if you own your real estate freehold. Logistics was the hottest sector to invest in before the crisis. In many respects, it's the least worst sector to invest in after the crisis. And a number of UK retailers have actually looked to do sale and leasebacks for their warehouse space, and they've generated significant amounts of capital already by trading out of their warehouse space and bringing that capital into the business. So I think that's a good thing to potentially examine, because, as I say, the European investment market has never been hotter for warehouse space.
Wow. So how do you think the virus or the reaction from the governments to the virus, including shutdowns, will affect the real estate investment in the industrial sector over the next several years?
I think that's the $1 million question. It's a tough one. I mean, I think the biggest question really is when does this period end? Rightly so. The focus is about saving people's lives and keeping people healthy. As long as this goes on for, the greater potential there is for the consumer behavior to change. And if we're talking about being out of this in May, end of May, beginning of June, early summer, then there's definitely a case to be made that things will just pick up where they left off. And actually, what would happen is, if you think about the UK market, actually vacancy would get lower quite quickly, because speculative development would and has decreased. So what that means is that actually, come the autumn, you could be in a situation where vacancy is fundamentally much lower than it was. So actually, the market fundamentals come the autumn are better than they were before the crisis started. And the weight of capital that is still targeting UK and European logistics and industrial property would become even more active. And in some cases, you could argue that pricing and cap rates may come in certain markets. Now, if, on the other hand, this drags out to the autumn, and we see a second wave of infection and a second wave of lockdown and restrictions, then all bets are off, really. Right. And let's do another one of these in September and see where we are, frankly.
All right. Well, hopefully we won't have to do that, and everything will be rocking and rolling.
Let's hope this is a one-off.
Yeah, sounds good. Hey, Kevin, thanks a lot for joining me and talking about this.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me, and see you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers.